China's panic. U.S. military shows warfighting force to Beijing in South China Sea. The U.S. military's involvement in the South China Sea has been described as an unprecedented deterrence by a Beijing think tank. Frequent reconnaissance operations by the U.S. Navy and Air Force contributed to what the report called warfighting readiness in the region. The South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, or SCSPI, an international research network dedicated to keeping track of important actions and political changes in the region, released the 38-page report on March 12, detailing the events of last year. The report reads, "The U.S. military continued to carry out intensive military activities in the South China Sea, with their strategic weapon platforms, typically carrier strike groups, strategic bombers and nuclear attack submarines, operating in the region frequently, posing unprecedented deterrence against China." In the meantime, the U.S. Navy and Air Force continued to conduct frequent reconnaissance operations in the region, deploying a mix of reconnaissance aircraft, including those of civilian contractors, to the South China Sea, all of which built up strong momentum for battlefield construction and warfighting readiness across the U.S. military. U.S. military operations have acted in the region in order to protect freedom of navigation and contribute to a free Indo-Pacific. China and many other countries have laid claim to almost all of the resource-rich region, causing tensions to surge. The Beijing-based think tank noted that the number and duration of activities in the region in 2020 was rarely seen in recent years. The report adds that nearly 1,000 reconnaissance missions were conducted over the region last year. The most recent SCSPI report is the third of its kind, as the initiative was set up in 2019. Its members include experts and scholars from across the world. It gathers data from both intellectual and open sources. It is not affiliated with any institution and is mainly funded by donation and non-profit investment. The report continues. In 2020, the U.S. military exerted maximum pressure in the South China Sea through a raft of intensive moves, such as deploying various strategic weapons platforms to the region, frequently operating near China's stationed islands and reefs and transiting the Taiwan Strait, in an attempt to display its military power and deter China. It added that maximum pressure will not crush China, but rather it may result in an uncontrollable situation. Beijing's foreign minister, Wang Yi, previously said that Trump's administration in 2020 was playing with fire. Speaking on March 7, Mr. Wang said the actions of the U.S. military in the region were in danger of crossing the line. Beijing has complained that the U.S. is exerting maximum pressure on the South China Sea and is inciting anti-China encirclement. As a leading member of China's Politburo leads a high-level diplomatic delegation to talks with Washington in Alaska this weekend, the relationship between the two world powers has reached a new low. On Thursday, Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian said Washington was attempting to revive Cold War-era alliances to counter China's growing influence. He accused Japan and the U.S. of a vicious attack on China's foreign policy and gross interference in China's internal affairs. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled to Tokyo this week. Shortly afterwards, a joint statement declared the Allies were committed to opposing coercion and destabilizing behavior towards others in the region. It also highlighted concerns over Beijing's open fire orders to its Coast Guard vessels. In retaliation, Zhao has accused Washington and Tokyo of a vicious attack on China's foreign policy. These efforts run counter to the current of the times and will only bring chaos and even confrontation to the region. As the diplomatic delegation squared off, a Beijing-based think tank accused Washington of unprecedented naval and air force deployments to the South China Sea, even as China's own navy began another round of intensive military exercises there. The intensive and oppressive military presence has led to escalating potential military risks. The South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, or SCSPI, has issued a 38-page report on the East and South China Seas ahead of this week's high-profile diplomatic events. The intensity, in terms of the scale, number and duration, of the U.S. military activities in the region in 2020 was rarely seen in recent years. It did not note Beijing's own dramatically increased military activity in the region last year. Chinese warships, aircraft and marine troops have been engaged in an almost endless chain of maneuvers and live fire exercises since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the Beijing University-based SCSPI says the continuation of U.S. activity in the area since the U.S. presidential election was a sign of Washington's insecurities. The report says U.S. carrier strike groups, strategic bombers and nuclear attack submarines had been posing unprecedented deterrence against China and was part of a program building up strong momentum for battlefield construction and warfighting readiness across the U.S. military. The think tank went on to accuse Washington of whipping up a militaristic frenzy in the disputed region. Beijing has itself been accused of the same dangerous nationalistic behavior, particularly after releasing a video appearing to depict an attack on the U.S. base of Guam. In an effort to emphasize competition with China, the U.S. flaunted military power on their official websites and social media and even publicly intimidated China, which significantly aggravated tensions in the South China Sea region, SCSPI accused. China uses coercion and aggression to systematically erode autonomy in Hong Kong, undercut democracy in Taiwan, abuse human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet, and assert maritime claims in the South China Sea that violates international law, U.S. Secretary of State Blinken said after talks in Tokyo. Beijing has sent its fishing militia and Coast Guard vessels into Japanese-controlled waters near the disputed Senkaku Islands for more than 32 consecutive days so far this year. This has raised Tokyo's concerns, particularly when coupled with Beijing having issued a law allowing its Coast Guard to open fire on intruders. China has told Japan it is exercising self-restraint in waters that are its inherent territory. The visit came after U.S. President Joe Biden and Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison met virtually with their Japanese and Indian counterparts in the first-ever top-level meeting for the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. The summit issued a joint statement asserting the nations intended to work together to meet challenges to the rules-based maritime order in the East and South China Seas. Amid the mounting international pressure, China's Foreign Minister Zhao warned that Beijing would take all measures necessary to resolutely defend sovereignty, security and development interest. Zhao lashed out, accusing all but Beijing of despicable and deeply unpopular behavior. He said Japan willingly stoops to acting as a strategic vassal to the U.S., repeating an accusation often leveled against Australia. In recent weeks, the People's Liberation Army says its navy has been conducting intensive combat drills in each of the 3 seas bordering China. Communist Party-controlled media has been releasing details, pictures and video of the operations in its northern and southern commands ahead of a diplomatic meeting between Beijing and Washington in Alaska this weekend.